Pilots. People who fly planes. The art of soaring the skies like a mighty pelican being a both literal and metaphorical high point for humanity's technological progression. And if you've ever been on holidays overseas, you have probably been in the clutches of one of these flying contraptions. Now, judging by the fact that you are watching this video, I presume you survived. If not, then my condolences. Please don't pass on to the other side until after the 10-minute mark, and be sure to haunt the dreams of your bereaved relatives by telling them to like and subscribe just like you hopefully did. But anyways, today's man of the hour was a pilot who was actually good. And he was not only just a junkie, being rather fond of a certain schniff, but also a spook, managing to become both a DEA informant and the personal pilot of none other than Pablo Escobar himself, and was a key figurehead in making some of Pablo Escobar's deliveries. Indeed, today's video is about none other than Barry Seal. Please leave a like and a comment on this video because it really helps me in the algorithm. Hey there, chums. I bet you didn't expect me to be able to hear you sneaking up on me there. Baka. Oh, you're wondering how I managed to hear you despite having my earbuds in. Well, the boffins with our sponsors, Raycon, have been at it once again and cooked up these, the essential open earbuds. As you can see, these bad boys are comfier than ever, with a super lightweight open ear design that doesn't compromise on the audio quality. And their 8-hour battery life provides the perfect distraction from Africa Chan's shorter rants about Madagascar. And the case brings the total amount of juice to 36 hours, which you can top up with wireless charging. They're also super compact and they fit in my pocket, and are IPX5 splash proof, so I won't short circuit them with sweat from the physical exertion of using my secret BJJ power move, standing up. Best of all, the essential open earbuds don't block out the outside world, which is a godsend for when I need to lock right in but still have to be aware of toddlers running around. Many Black Templars fell before they were forced to retreat into my studio. Also, the essential open earbuds prevent me from just drifting through the world in blissful ignorance because of my heckin' epic cinematic trailer music not being powerful enough to imbue me with the superpowers needed to raise my hand and matrix cars to a stop like the cracked little egg that I am. Instead, the essential open earbuds allow me to hear oncoming traffic and avoid playing Analog Frogger while still listening to my favourite song. Why does everybody keep bullying me? It's not trailer music, it's neoclassical. I'm sick of having to tell people that. So, if you're looking for earbuds that move with you, whether you're commuting, working, or just living life, the essential open earbuds are the way to go. So, go to buyraycon.com/dankulaopen to get 20% off your order of the essential open earbuds. We begin in Baton Rouge, Louisiana on July the 16th, 1939, where Adler Berryman Seal enters the world with a rather gay boy name. The son of a candy wholesaler, Seal presumably waddled through his early years plump and full of glee. We really don't know much about Seal's early life because, amongst other things, he was a grade A bullshitter. So finding anything actually concrete about the guy was about as pleasant as having your teeth extracted by pliers that are overly lubricated and struggle to get a good grip. I hate doing Mad Lads on bullshitters, because it's very, very difficult to separate the fact from the fiction, or a part that sounds like a really, really cool story, but it turns out to be something that the subject just completely made up. Though, having said that, I can confidently say that he graduated high school in 1957, and that he was said to be, and I quote, full of fun, full of folly. Make of that what you will. Regardless, he seemingly had a very, very keen interest in aviation from a young age, getting flying lessons by the age of just 15 by apparently hanging around airports and pestering who he thought were pilots into tutoring him. Remember, this was the mid-1950s. Standards were a lot more lax back then. But, surprisingly enough, the lad was gifted, with his flight instructors even saying so themselves, letting him fly solo after just 8 hours in the cockpit at the age of fucking 15. So, it's no surprise that young Barry got his private pilot license after just a year. Now, I don't exactly know if that's enough time in the cockpit to warrant a fucking license, but hey, it was the 1950s. And I'm a feckless landlubber, and he was Barry fucking Seal. So, what do I know about flying a plane? Well, funnily enough, that is what the flight instructors also started asking. Because even though Barry was evidently gifted, he apparently had no grasp at all on his own tenuous mortality, being needlessly ballsy in the air and almost getting himself killed pretty regularly. This can be seen when Barry decided to open up a business focusing on flying advertising banners over Baton Rouge. You know, like those really corny marriage proposals, but instead of some soppy gay sign fawning over my dearest Deborah, it was just a kitsch slogan and logo telling you to drink your corn syrup or whatever the fuck it is you godless New Worlders do when you're not ham-boning or eating a legally distinct cheese product spelled with a Z. Well, when Barry was doing a standard advertising sortie, he ended up pushing the plane to its limit. And he ended up crash landing, losing multiple teeth and presumably getting a brief glance at the pearly gates. Either way, he wasn't as good a pilot as he thought. So, come 1962, he would mosey on down to Nolans and enlist in the Louisiana National Guard. And he proceeded to do absolutely fuck all, spending the first 5 years of his 6 in service being relegated to an active duty with the 245th Engineer Battalion as a radio operator. Riveting, I know. The remaining year's worth of service was spent graduating jump school and being subsequently embedded with the 20th Special Forces Group. Quite the step up from squaddy tech support. And due to the nature of the group, being special and all, we actually don't know anything about his activities, barring the fact that he supposedly did some stuff in Vietnam. But honestly, I don't believe him. Because, amongst other things, his actual service record shows that he had actually never even set foot in Asia, let alone Vietnam. And frankly, why the fuck would the US government send the Louisiana National Guard to fucking Vietnam? Actually, alright, it kind of fits, similar environments and all that, but still. What we can confidently say, however, is that he picked up a side gig with Transworld Airlines as a flight engineer in 1964. Remember, he was in the National Guard and mostly in active duty, not the army proper. So, he was able to do a day job independently of his service. As a simple flight engineer, Barry very quickly rose the ranks, managing to become a first officer and then a full-blown captain. If only his actual military career was that fruitful. But anyways, now as a captain, he would be piloting a Boeing 707 along a regular route to Europe and in the process becoming the youngest pilot in the TWA's fleet, with presumed bragging rights to boot. The issue is, being a standard everyday pilot is boring as fuck. Turns out, you're not allowed to have fun. But of course, that wasn't enough excitement for young Barry to have in his life. So, when he was approached in 1972 for his proposed involvement in a plot to smuggle explosives into Mexico for some cheeky Cuban chaps who really didn't like Fidel Castro, Barry jumped at this very exciting proposal. Then it turned out that those cheeky Cuban chaps were actually spooks. And Barry was subsequently arrested and charged for conspiring to smuggle explosives. The TWA then heard about this little kerfuffle with one of their pilots, and they promptly clipped Barry's wings and fired him. Though you can see the length of this video and breathe a sigh of relief, because Barry actually got to walk free due to the prosecution erroneously brandishing an assault rifle before the jury, claiming that it was Barry's, and in the process allowing the defence to posit that such actions were prejudicing the jury. And in response, the judge presiding over the case actually declared a mistrial. And just like that, Barry evaded prison through just sheer fucking luck. But despite walking free, Barry was not doing so well. Because not only did the case cost him his job and have his name blacklisted from all legitimate airlines, but the court proceedings ate through most of his savings, leaving him perilously close to bankruptcy. And worst of all, he had contracted a debilitating ailment. His third wife, Deborah Ann Dubois. What about the first two wives? Well, they were near brushes that he managed to shake off. Don't worry about them. So, you've got a man left penniless by an operation perpetrated by his own government, who is an objectively very gifted pilot, grounded and rendered unemployable by virtually every single legal airline. Gee, I wonder what Barry Seal is going to do to remedy this current conundrum. Well, he had it figured out. As by the mid-1970s, Barry had picked up the habit of smuggling the occasional little bit of Mary Jane. The thing is, though, the giggle bush is not very profitable, with Big Dick Rick Nixon cracking down on hash production in Mexico, rendering the stuff volatile to hold and difficult to get. Especially pound for pound, which matters when you've got a limited amount of cargo space and a lot of eyes on you. If only there was a much more profitable drug that would need to be smuggled, could be produced away from the leering eyes of Uncle Sam, and could sell for a lot more money for a lot less weight. If such a substance were to exist, that would really help poor Barry out. By complete coincidence, the enterprising minds of the often overlooked Southern Americas were currently working on that very substance, with aspiring politician and hippo enjoyer Pablo Escobar taking advantage of the void left by the wheatheads and spearheading a totally legitimate coca refinement business that was looking to tap into the virgin US market. Though Don Pablo won't come into today's story just yet. Regardless, Escobar's influence was being felt by young Barry, because by 1978 he decided to start smuggling cocaine to increase his profit margins. This worked so well that Barry was busted and jailed in Honduras while doing a run. Though this may sound like a terrible fate, it actually ended up working in Barry's favour. Because thankfully, he wasn't carrying any drugs just yet, so they couldn't nail him as a drug smuggler. Instead, they nailed him with just ownership of an unlicensed firearm, which got him 7 months. Now, that might sound a little bit silly, but bear in mind he is a smuggler carrying cargo worth millions of dollars. Of course he's packing. Whilst he was in Honduran prison, Barry was making the most of his time in the slammer by networking, rubbing shoulders and becoming chummy with a bunch of heavy hitters in the business, including local Honduran smugglers and even a fellow flying Louisianian by the name of Emil Camp, who would go on to naturally be one of Barry's besties. And most importantly, he also met with Roger Reeves, who had a lot of friends in the newly established Medellin cartel. You see, the cartel was in need of vectors to move product, with the typical Mexican land route being finely combed by the gringos and the Caribbean route being heavily monitored, due in part to Cuba. So other methods had to be considered, and Barry was just the guy that they needed. And of course, he was more than happy to oblige them. So, come 1981, they struck an accord and got into business together, with Barry braving the skies once more to smuggle drugs into the United States. Though instead of the laughing lettuce, it was instead the proverbial white gold. Barry's methodology was novel, using his prowess to fly low and avoid most forms of radar. Then snaking along the myriad of oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico so that if he did appear on radar, they would just assume that he was a helicopter. And from there, he would shut his lights off, don night vision goggles, and perform airdrops for collection teams in remote parts of Louisiana in the dead of night. The thing is, though, that is an awful lot of effort for just one plane to make. So to remedy this, Barry decided to upscale. He got more employees and more planes, resulting in an air wing of 12 aircraft doing deliveries all around the clock, resulting in an absolute fuck ton of money being made. But even with this little low altitude trick, the amount of steel in the sky captured the attention of local authorities and eventually even the feds themselves. To counteract this, Barry switched his operations away from Louisiana to Mena, Arkansas, which is bumfuck nowhere and further north into an entirely separate landlocked state. Smack dab right in the middle of the Ouachita National Forest. Not the sort of place that you would expect a Colombian care package to drop. From there, Barry would spend his time in Mena modifying his aircraft to increase carrying capacity, and maybe being involved in the murder of Don Henry and Kevin Ives, but that's a whole other thing. Regardless, he was living the high life, raking in at his peak an estimated $500,000 per flight, which, multiplied by his 12 planes, means that Big Boy Barry brought back a bountiful $6 million per haul. Seems awfully high, I know, but really, Americans just fucking love cocaine. Though you would be very wise to remember that the killer of the comfortable is complacency. And Barry was not only complacent, but he was also really fucking stupid. Because Barry had a very nasty habit of just boasting to random people about what he did for a living. And wouldn't you know it, one of the people that he decided to boast to was an undercover DEA agent who was wearing a wire. In fact, Barry did a lot more than just show off. He actually promised this exact undercover DEA agent that he would smuggle 1,200 pounds of Quaaludes into the United States just for him. A monumental nat one moment if ever I've seen one. The DEA operation that was investigating Seal and his pod of pilots was known as Operation Screamer. And boy, was it a real fucking screamer. Because Barry really did smuggle in 1,200 pounds of Quaaludes for the DEA agent, and the Quaaludes turned out to be fucking fake. Barry and his 79 other accomplices were about to get nailed to a judicial cross for smuggling fucking chalk. Realising that he was utterly fucked, Big Baz surrendered to the feds and he tried to cut a deal with first the Florida Task Force and then the Baton Rouge Task Force by teasing them about how he was totally best mates with the members of the Ochoa family, who, for context, were one of the core families of the Medellin cartel. And both of these agencies, very strangely, told him to get fucked. Now, you might be wondering why both agencies rejected this offer when Barry dangled such a juicy morsel of gossip about one of the core dynasties of the Medellin cartel. Well, it's probably because they knew he was absolutely fucking lying because they knew he was a complete bullshitter. And to be fair, he was lying, because Barry had never actually met any of the actual cartel. He worked with them through intermediaries, because cartel bosses kind of go right out of their way to make sure that they cannot be connected to their drug empires in any way at all. So you would never see any of them talking to a grunt like Barry Seal. Pablo and co. didn't even know Barry's fucking name, and they never even met. All they knew about him was his alias, El Gordo, which means the fat man. So Barry was facing 10 years in prison and just got told to stuff himself by 2 separate police districts. Shit. So he decided to throw one more Hail Mary into the mix by approaching the South Florida task force with a different deal. That Barry could get Escobar directly. And after being asked to prove it, Barry used his legally required phone call to hook up with a friend and actually somehow set up a meeting with none other than Don Pablo himself. But what made this shit even funnier was the fact that for this meeting, Barry used the alias of Ellis Mackenzie. A name that the cartel had never heard of, so they had no idea who he was. Just that he was some random gringo that wanted to talk to the boss. Now, this is where it gets really fucking funny. The cartel had heard that Barry Seal, El Gordo, had been arrested by the DEA and was now completely out of the picture, because he was going away for a very long time. So they now needed a new pilot. Then they get contacted by this Ellis Mackenzie fellow who wants to smuggle drugs for them. Wow, what excellent timing. So the cartel actually agreed to the meeting. And just like that, the DEA threw Barry a bone and allowed him to turn informant. And indeed, Barry proceeded to actually go to the meeting and meet up with both the Ochoa family and Escobar himself, being the very first DEA operative to ever actually do so. Now, you might be thinking, oh, when he turns up to that meeting, his goose is absolutely cooked. But remember, the cartel bosses had never actually met Barry and didn't know who he was or what he even looked like. So, when Barry sat down at the meeting, they didn't recognise him, and he essentially did an interview for the job that he was already doing for the cartel, and the cartel had no fucking idea because they didn't recognise him. That is probably one of the stupidest yet ballsiest things I've ever heard. So, what did the meeting actually consist of? Well, the cartel was very much interested in smuggling a good haulage of Peruvian marching powder preceding the 1984 Summer Olympics, which would be taking place in LA. Naturally, because this is the United States, it means that whenever sports ball adjacent activities are on, narcotics consumption spikes. And the Olympics is kind of an important sporting event. The only issue was that logistically that would be a fair bit more of a hassle than merely just reaching the south. So Barry would need a refueling point halfway along the journey. And wouldn't you know it, by complete coincidence, they had one lined up for him in Nicaragua. What's so special about Nicaragua? Well, during this time, Nicaragua was a type of state that we in the industry call a junta, run by some plucky little munchkins known as the FSLN, better known to the American corn munchers as the Sandinistas. Indeed, Pablo and co. evidently had connections with communists in Central America. And seeing as how this was the waning years of the Cold War, this naturally made other branches of the US government very, very interested in Pablo Escobar. And of course, including them. Yeah, this was now in their domain. Barry was now de facto property of them. The CIA naturally gave Seal the green light to go ahead with this operation. So the cartel got to work on fitting out the plane with all of the goods and fuel it would need for the long flight northwards. Issue was that they overloaded the plane beyond capacity and caused it to crash immediately upon takeoff. And the only replacement plane that they had on hand had a smaller fuel capacity and capable of a direct flight to the United States. So Seal essentially just had to do a brief stopover in Nicaragua to refuel before finishing his flight northwards. Sounds simple, doesn't it? Well, when Barry entered into Nicaraguan airspace, he was immediately shot at by the military and forced to make an emergency landing at the Sandino International Airport. Whereupon, exiting the badly damaged aircraft, he was immediately dragged to a prison at gunpoint. Because someone forgot to tell the local troops stationed at the airstrip that Barry was coming. Of course, after a little bit of hubbub, Escobar managed to grease enough palms to get Barry released. Eventually, Barry found his way back to the United States so that he could get debriefed by his new handlers, and presumably have a very awkward conversation with his wife. As you may expect, the Glowies were rather uncaring, because they now wanted to bug Barry's plane with cameras so that they could catch the Sandinistas in the act of facilitating Escobar's drug trade. Because if they can link it to a bunch of communists, the public would be much more eager to have the federal government assert themselves upon Nicaragua. If you catch my drift. Barry was resistant to this. Not because he held any particular loyalty to the Medellin cartel, but more so because if they found out that he was a rat, they would do absolutely fucking unspeakable things to him. Because if you somehow don't know, or if you never went on Live Leak when it was around, the cartel does very, very bad things to snitches. But Barry eventually folded to the spook's request and had his new plane, a Fairchild C-123K, outfitted with 2 hidden cameras to try and catch the drug runners in 360p. It was the 80s. And after doing all of the standard pre-flight checks, Barry took off once more to return to Nicaragua, where he would do the daring deed. Upon landing, without being shot at this time, things immediately started to go wrong. Because, as it turns out, the hidden cameras were clunky and broken pieces of shit that started making an extremely obvious whirring noise whenever they were turned on. So, in a panic, Barry and his co-pilots cycled and flushed the engines to try and hide the noise. Thankfully, the Nicaraguan troops who were sent to help load the cocaine didn't notice the cameras. And this is when Barry's streak of luck struck once more. Because, for whatever fucking reason, Pablo Escobar himself came to Nicaragua to help load the aircraft, resulting in the man himself unknowingly being caught red-handed in his corny striped polo shirt. This photograph's existence was a massive fucking deal. Not just for the federal agency stateside, but for Colombian society itself, and especially Barry Seal. Because the second that photograph was developed, Barry Seal was a dead man. And he knew it. But that's obviously only if the photographs are made public. Well, the CIA instantly leaked the photographs to the press for their aforementioned geopolitical plays. So, sucks to be you, Barry boy. Indeed, within a month of that photograph being taken, a $1 million bounty was placed on Barry Seal's head. And even worse, Barry couldn't even go into hiding because he still had to appear in court for smuggling fake Quaaludes. Because even after this fucking massive favour that he did for them in getting these photographs, the feds never even dropped Barry's charges against him in return for him being an informant. He did all of this and got a $1 million bounty on his head for absolutely nothing. They completely fucked him over. The one mercy that he was given, however, was that his sentence would be quite drastically reduced, because he gets sentenced to just a measly 6 months of community service with the Salvation Army. Quite a mild slap on the wrist for literal drug smuggling. However, what made this sentence seal Barry Seal's fate was the following stipulations. That he cannot legally own a firearm, and that he cannot hire armed bodyguards as a loophole for that. Because remember, felons can't own firearms. And what made this situation even worse was the fact that Barry Seal was to stay at a halfway house in Baton Rouge for the duration of his 6-month sentence. A halfway house that the judge read the address of out loud in the middle of the sentencing. So Barry Seal, whose name and face is in public circulation now, was to spend the next 6 months at the Baton Rouge branch of the Salvation Army, the address of which the judge very kindly read out loud for everyone to hear, and he had to stay there while unarmed and with a $1 million bounty on his head. The courts basically killed him. And considering how the CIA just love to tie up loose ends, this was on purpose. Despite all of that, Barry actually managed to last a lot longer than you might think. Because despite being such an easy target, people were actually kind of hesitant to take him down. Not because he was a danger, not at all. I mean, the damage had already been done. It was more so the fact that the government would obviously catch and prosecute anyone who carried out the hit. And that seems quite obvious, I know, but remember that this guy had what is nowadays a $3 million bounty on his head for whoever did the deed. That sort of money would be one hell of a motivator for anyone. Of course, eventually someone actually stepped up to do the hit. Or in this case, 2 people. 2 men pulled up to the halfway house on the night of February 19th, 1986. They approached Barry, who was sitting in his car about to move from a nearby parking lot, and both men absolutely mag-dumped into Barry at point-blank range with MAC-10s, killing him instantly. And just like that, Barry Seal was dead. Left to rot in his car until he was found by police arriving on site. An unceremonious death for a man who I can only describe as extra, in both character and waist circumference. As, despite being a fat idiot with a massive ego, he somehow, through sheer luck, managed to do some of the most audacious shit that I've ever seen, almost always unscathed. But despite all of that, Barry was his own worst enemy. Because apparently during the subsequent investigations into federal conduct after his death, it turned out that Barry, in his own fucking hubris, refused an offer to enter witness protection after the trial. I can't really find a solid reason as to why he did this, and frankly, I don't fucking believe that. I do think the feds were actually trying to get him killed, so I believe that he was never actually offered witness protection. They just said after the fact, oh, well, we offered him it, and he said no because Barry wasn't around anymore to dispute that. Understandably, there was a massive outcry in response to the whole ordeal, with the blame being squarely laid at the feet of the government, due to what I can only describe as strategic incompetence to achieve a desired outcome. But by that point, Barry was already dead. The gentlemen responsible for his death were of course arrested and charged, with 6 Colombians in total being rounded up and judicially finger-wagged, with 2 of the 6 actually having their charges dropped and being deported due to them not being involved enough in the hit and the evidence against them being rather weak, with the remaining 4 being found guilty and given a range of sentences that were very meh overall. You know a situation is absolutely fucked when the government is fighting a literal cartel and you somehow can't tell who's the lesser evil. I mean, at least Pablo Escobar paid his goons well before suiciding them. The US government just battery farms you for their own gain and then just sticks you in a fucking halfway house to get 2-packed, apparently. Barry Seal was just one small character in a massive drama involving the cartels. Pablo Escobar himself, of course, deserves a Mad Lad video of his own. But so do all of his closest advisors and hitmen, because a lot of them did some absolutely insane things that were so extreme and so outrageous that they were the reason that the term narco-terrorism was first used. I've got a bunch of names that I need to add to the Mad Lad list.
It's Count Dankula on YouTube. Everybody just subscribe.